Hi, this is Brian with ActiveMelody.com. So in this week's lesson, we're going to go over everything I played in the intro note for note, which is very simple to play, but I wanted to relate it to modes and what modes are, you know, what is modal playing, how do you find them, and then how do you actually use them? That's the big thing. And so how does it relate to the guitar? If you want to go into a certain type of mode, how do you start? Where do you find it? And so that's what we're going to be covering over the next couple of weeks. So this week we're going to start with that. We're going to be looking at the major scale, and then next week we're going to jump into even more detail on modal playing. So in this week's lesson, though, I've got it split into two parts. In this video, we're going to cover the first half. If you'd like to learn the rest of the video, get the handout PDF file that I created, and the MP3 jam track, and the tablature for the jam track. You can get all those things by going to ActiveMelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, and do a search for EP374. All right, so this is going to be a two-part lesson series on modes. And it's not just going to be showing you what a mode is. There's plenty of information on that. But it's going to be showing you how to use it. How do you take these modes that you've learned, and how do you find them? If you want to go into Lydian mode, for example, you know, how do you find that as a guitar player? What's an easy way to get there? And so that's what my goal is in this little two-part lesson series. And so we're going to be doing this a little bit out of conventional order. The conventional way of teaching modes would be to say, here's the piano, here's the major scale, we're going to be in the key of C, we're going to be looking at all the white keys, and now we're going to start on the second interval, which would be a D, and we're going to play the same scale, we're going to be in a different mode and all that. And some of you are going, wait, what? Don't worry, we're not going to be doing that. I'm going to do this a little different. I want to start with the major scale first. Instead of getting into modes and all of that, there's this assumption that everybody knows what the major scale is. And so if you've noticed, when I talk about the major scale, I always say, you know, the major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I do that to re-emphasize it. Everybody knows do, re, mi, but not everybody knows major scale is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's why I do that. It seems so basic, but you'd be surprised how many people say, wait, what is the major scale? And so I'm going to assume now that you know what the major scale is based on what I just told you. But that's how we're going to start this whole thing, is we're going to start with the major scale. And what's really cool about modes is once you understand the major scale and then how to play it all up and down the neck, and that's what this lesson, this first part is all about, is how do you play the major scale in the 5 different positions that relate to the CAGED system. Once you're able to do that, you are a modal player. You can now play in all 7 modes, because the only difference is changing the starting point. So if you wanted to play in a certain type of mode, you just have to know where to start that major scale. It's still the same major scale, same shapes used all over the neck. So you have to know the major scale before you can get into modes anyway. And so what I wanted to do this week was start with looking at the major scale in 5 positions, but then have a song that you can play that sounds cool. It's kind of got a spacey sound, the song that I played in the intro. And so you'll be able to play that by the end of this, and then have a sort of a rough sketch understanding of how it works. But then next week we're going to really color that in so that you totally get it. And I did it this way on purpose. I'm setting it up in sort of a different way, and I think it's going to make sense as we go through it. So just bear with me. Don't give me the thumbs down yet. Just bear with me. It's going to make sense by the end of this. All right, so we're going to start off, and we're going to talk about the major scale in 5 positions. Why 5? It's the same 5 positions from the CAGED system, C-A-G-E-D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you don't know what the CAGED system is, I have a lesson on that, EP374. You can go back to Active Melody, you can do a search for that, and then and reference that if you need it. But with CAGED, you've got these different shapes, and we usually use CAGED when thinking about chord shapes, the different chord voicings. You can also, however, connect the major scale to those, and that makes it much easier to be able to play the major scale all over the neck. And that's how I like to group them. I like to connect them back to that. So, and if you're a premium member, I have an extra video on what we're about to go through here that goes into just some tips and things that I've learned when I'm playing these, some practice tips. And there's also a handout, a PDF file that I've created that shows you the different positions. You can use that as a quick reference guide. So we're going to start with the G chord right here using the E chord shape. So these 3 fingers are making the E shape, right? And then I can play the major scale Right in position there, 2 octaves of it, right off of that chord shape. So if I'm ever playing in a key of something, I can just find that E chord shape version of the chord, and then I can quickly play the major scale. And that's what the cheat sheet that I'm talking about in that extra video go into detail on how that works. There's also the D shape, which would be up in this position. Right? So there's different ways to play it. You have the C shape, which is up here, and you start with your pinky, which is in the chord. Now I know that I'm just kind of buzzing through this, and this is just a plug for the other video, but I want you to at least see what I'm talking about. We have the A chord shape up here, and then finally we're up into the G chord shape. And once you're able to play the major scale in all those different positions, and it goes quicker than you think when you learn them. It's just 5 things to kind of memorize, I guess. And that part you're just going to have to do. You're just going to have to sit down and memorize. But once you're able to do that, you're playing the major scale all over the neck. And then once you get up here, obviously it repeats. It's an octave of where you are down here, and so forth. So I just wanted to mention that. That's what I go over in that extra video, is just a little more detail on what I just did there. And then there's the handout, which makes it easier. You can just print that off or look at it on your screen and use that as a reference. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you've at least understand what we're talking about so far. So when we talk about this song that I played, that song was played in the G major scale. There were 3 chords in the song. So there was a G chord, it was a 1-4-5 G chord, and it was played really slow. I stayed on each chord for a long time. It was like this. And then, you stay on the G for a while, and then it goes to the C. And then it goes to the D. And then back to the G. So 3 basic chords, 1-4-5. But I stayed on the G major scale for all those chords. And it kind of is similar to when I talk about staying in the key of the song, and when it comes to blues, I talk about this a lot, where you can either play the chord changes and change the scale to match the chord, or you can just stay in the key of the song, play the pentatonic of the key of the song. This is similar to that. We're going to stay in the key of the song, so we're staying in the key of G, even though there's these extra chords. But the difference is we're playing the full major scale, so all 7 notes of the major scale, as opposed to the 5 notes of the pentatonic. You wouldn't believe the difference that makes. It gives you a whole different palette to paint from, and your colors are much more vibrant when you have those extra 2 notes. All right, so we're going to jump into the specific notes that I played in the intro, but before I do that, I want to give just this quick overarching look at what we're about to learn here. And so for some of you, this will be a big light bulb moment. Some of you that already have a basic understanding of modes, this will be huge. And for those of you that have no idea what modes are yet, you're just going to have to kind of bear with us just for a minute. I know we're all at different places with learning. This is all going to make sense in the end, so you're just going to have to trust me on that. But even if you don't know what modes are, just try and follow along here. So we're playing this in the key of G, and we're going to be doing everything out of the G major scale. So that's good. That's all we have to worry about. 7 notes. And when I play the G major scale with a G chord, totally makes sense, right? If I throw in the C chord, it has a different feel. Listen to this. Listen, now that's the G major scale. You wouldn't know that because I was starting on a different note from the scale, but it's still, I'm starting on the 4th, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I was starting on the C note there. But if I play the G major scale starting on the C, listen to that note. That note is the most interesting note, and this is where I talk about one little note can totally change the vibe. To me, that note changes everything. It gives it much more of like a John Williams film score. And John Williams would play in Lydian mode quite a bit. That's what we're playing in. Believe it or not, we're playing in Lydian mode for this moment now. So we're playing in C Lydian, even though I'm still playing the G major scale. And you'll hear that when the song switches to the C chord and I play. It has that real spacey sound, and that's because we're playing that one note. Now that's the C major scale, but we've just sharpened the 4th. So that's one way to think about Lydian. Again, we're going to go over that in detail next week. But that's just what's going on there. That's why it has that kind of weird kind of pull. And then when the song goes to the D chord, I still stayed in the G major scale. Now listen to the difference here. If I start on the 5th, hear that how the 7th is flat? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That sounds a little bit off. That's because we flattened the 7. If you were playing the D major scale proper, it would be, right? That's the D major scale. But when you flatten the 7, you're in Mixolydian mode. So anyway, the overarching concept that's going on here is when the song was in the G, playing over the G chord, I was in the G major scale, which is called Ionian mode. So you already know one of the modes. It's just a weird name. So, but then when the song switches to the C chord, we were playing in C Lydian mode, even though I was still just playing the G major scale. Then when it goes to D, we were playing in D Mixolydian mode. So I know that to some of you that's like, whoa, that's cool. That like blows your mind that you were playing on all these modes just by staying in the one scale. And the rest of you that are totally lost, don't worry. You can ask questions if you want, and then we'll get to them. But next week I'm going to totally clear this up. Any of the muddy water, we're gonna clear it up. All right, so there's your background, and hopefully you've got the major scale now, and you've got this sort of overarching understanding of what's going on here. Now let's learn the notes that we're playing. So I started with, it comes in right on the 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I played the 3rd fret 2nd string. And then I came down to the 1st fret 2nd string. And then I played open 2, 3, and 4. So these notes. Now what is that? Well, this is the G chord shape. Remember when I was going through the 5 different shapes, I came to the G chord up here. Right? Well, that's the same thing. It's just an octave lower, right? So these notes that we're playing are coming out of that G chord shape. And I'm trying to hit all 5 shapes in this little solo piece, even though it's only a minute long. I tried to go all the way up the neck to give you samplings from each of the different positions. So that's the first one. Very simple, but you can understand now that that's just the G major scale, notes in the G major scale. Then it stays on the G chord, and I played. Now here's something else that's really cool that's going on, and this works really well for this kind of spacey sound, is to let the notes step on top of each other. Let them overlap. And so I love having the G major scale in different positions because I can do that in certain places that I can't in others. And this is a case where I'm playing, right? I'm just playing those 2 notes, but I'm letting them ring out on top of each other. And I like to try and experiment with music that way. And some notes are going to clash horribly and sound really wrong. Some notes like this, they are clashing, but in a kind of a pretty way when you hear the G chord underneath it. The other thing I should mention is my tone. I forgot to say that, 'cause people always ask about that. I'm using a twin reverb model from the Kemper, and I've got a little bit of delay going on. You can hear that, and then there's some reverb in there as well, some hall reverb, so it's got that real big spacey sound. So if you want that kind of sound, you're going to want to try and use a hall reverb if you've got it. It just has that. Or really crank the reverb on whatever you've got. And then add a delay if you've got that. You don't have to, but that's what I'm doing. Okay, so back to the song. We're on the 4th string here, and I'm playing 5th fret, 7th fret. And then I come up to that 4th fret, 3rd string. And let those 2 notes ring out. Again, this would be playing out of the D shape, which you can see in your printout if you've got that downloaded. That's where I'm at. So I went like that, and then I walked it up. So that's 4th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret on the 3rd string, and then I came up here to the 8th fret 2nd string. And then watch this. We're going to come down to the 7th fret 2nd string and play 2, 3, 2. That's all on the 7th fret there. 2, 3, 2. That's where that spacey sound happens. Now this is where the song switches to a C chord. So it goes up and up to here. And I just let those notes ring out for a while, just to create the space. Remember that when you're playing lead, especially if you're trying to go for this kind of vibe, play as little as you can. And try and find notes that harmonize or that clash in a certain way, and just let them ring out. It's just it creates a much different, more relaxing kind of vibe. Let me play along with the jam track and play these notes up to this point so that you can hear them in context. Okay, so after we played this, then I'm going to keep my ring finger on that 7th fret 3rd string and put my index finger on the 5th fret 2nd string and play those two notes. Now, notice the thing that I'm doing here. I'm letting these notes just step on top of each other as much as I can. So that's 3rd and 2nd string. And then watch this. We're going to just walk up the major scale. We're still in that D shape, right? Isn't that pretty? It's just because we're letting the notes ring out like that. So we're gonna go 5th fret 2nd string, 7th fret, 8th fret, all on the 2nd string. And then we're gonna come to the 5th fret 1st string. Notice those two ringing at the same time. And then I'm gonna go 2, 1, 2, 3. And that 3rd string is behind the 7th fret there. And I'm using my ring finger. Now my fingers look like they're all contorted. And I guess in some ways they are, but it's comfortable. It's not awkward. And it was just because I wasn't thinking about a chord or anything like that. I was just picturing the notes in the major scale, and I was just trying to let as many of them overlap as I could. You could just take one little area of the major scale like this, and you could let this jam track play. And you know, when you've got it playing in the background, just see how many notes you can let ring out. And you know, you'll start to get all kinds of different ideas and things like that. And part of the reason that we have that spacey sound going on for this part of it is because the chord has changed to the C chord. But we're staying in the G major scale, remember? And that gives us that C Lydian mode. Because we have like the C major scale, but we have the sharpened 4th, which is that note. And so anytime you can come back to that note, it just emphasizes a whole different thing. It's a small ingredient, but it adds a big kick to the flavor of the song or of the lead that we're playing. Okay, so after that, we're going to go. Now this is where I kind of broke scale thought, just being honest with you, being straightforward, and I just went into a chord here. It's still playing out of the G major scale, but I was thinking about that looks like this would be considered the C chord shape, even though I'm making the D chord triad here. So it just depends on how you look at it. Is this the D chord shape? Is this the D chord shape? They're both kind of sharing that D chord area. So I made the D chord shape here with my middle finger on the 7th fret, and then my index finger also on the 7th fret, strings 1 and 3, and then ring finger on the 8th fret 2nd string. And the way I played that was 3, 2, 1, and then my pinky goes down on the 8th fret 1st string, and I did a pull off there. Pull off, 2nd string, 3rd string. I love the sound of that. Alright, so let's put on the slow version of the jam track and play up to that point. All right, so now the song switches to the D chord, and we're going to stay in the G major scale like we have been. And I'm going to use this technique. Now, this is something I've mentioned before, and every time I do, somebody always leaves a comment like, whoa, I wish I'd thought of that. What I'm doing, those are the notes that I'm playing, but instead of just going down the notes, sounds so boring, I played the 8th fret 2nd string twice, and then I came to the 7th fret, still on the 2nd string, and then bent to the note that I just played. That's the takeaway. So you play a note, and then you go to 1 fret behind it, and then you bend up to that note. It gives you a really cool feeling, and you can do that anywhere in any scale in any type of music. It's just it's a cool way to kind of introduce like a pedal steel lick. So we're going to go to that 7th fret 2nd string, bend and release, and then 9-7 on the 3rd string. Now where we're at here is we're playing out of this chord shape. So we're still playing out of the G chord that's using the C shape. Right? So there's our major scale, and those are the different, the different positions of the major scale that I mentioned earlier. We're now in the C shape. And then I came down and went, let 2 notes ring out again. So I put my pinky down on the 10th fret 4th string while I have my index finger on the 7th fret 3rd string. And then I walk down 9-7 on the 4th string. So real simple, right? But those notes are all just the G major scale. I keep saying that because it's just amazing to me that the one scale works over all of these. Now, while the chord in the song is the D chord, and we're playing that G major scale, remember that puts us in D Mixolydian mode. It gives us the D major scale, but with the flatted 7th. All right, so we have okay, then the song stays on the D chord for one more measure, and I came up here just to show you the different positions again, just to try and get us through all of them. Now I'm up here, I'm gonna play out of the A shape, so I'm gonna play. That's what we're gonna learn. So that's the 12th fret 4th string. Make sure you play that with your ring finger so that these other fingers can cram in and make and ring out like they need to. So 12th fret 4th string, 9th fret 3rd string, we let those ring out, and then we're going to go with middle finger to the 11th fret 3rd string, and then 12th fret 3rd string with pinky. Let those notes stay there, and then put your index finger on the 10th fret 2nd string. Now just remember, all these notes are the G major scale. However, we're still over the D chord, so we have this. And then while I'm holding those fingers down, I'm gonna play 3, 2, 3, 4, and let those ring out. And then I'm gonna come back down to the E chord shape and go. I'm using that same technique I just showed you, where we do the half bend and release. I could have went like that, but I thought it sounded better to bend into that. 4th fret 3rd string, bend and release, and then 5th fret 4th string. And that's the whole solo for that. And obviously you're covering quite a bit of modal playing in something as simple as that, even though we haven't jumped into modes really in a proper way yet, and we're going to do that next week. But this gives you a good understanding of the major scale, and you see that it's all just the major scale. So hopefully if you remember anything about modal playing, you just have to know that it's really just the major scale. And to change the mode, you just change the starting point of that scale. Now, we didn't have to change the starting point. I should mention this. We didn't have to change starting points while we were going through this because the chords were changing. So in actual fact, if you think about it, like when it goes to a C chord and you're playing the G major scale, you are changing the starting point. If you think about it. If you don't understand that, I'll clear it up next week. But hopefully that is something that's fun to practice. You can sit and play that jam track forever. Experiment with those different modes. Now that you kind of know what's going on, just see what you can do. And also make sure you keep working on letting notes ring out on top of each other like that. It gives you a whole different vibe. All right, we'll see you next week for the follow-up.